All right. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to this very special town hall meeting, Gen Z and Democracy, What Matters Most to Young Voters. It's sponsored by the Coalition to Restore Ethics, Equity, and Democracy, or CREED. I'm Todd Shaw, one of the conveners of CREED, and shortly I will introduce my co-moderator, Dr. Tracy Weldon, our tech person today, Dr. Kimberly Simmons. There are maybe other members of the CREED convening committee who will be present, and then of course our very special panelists for today's program. But let me start with just a few facts about the constituency that we're going to be having a conversation with today, Gen Z. On the eve of the 2024 presidential election, among the constituencies that all are wondering whether they will turn out in big numbers is the younger voter constituency of Gen Z. Gen Z are those voters who were born between 1997 and 2012 and came of age during the tumultuous years of the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, Gen Z, or Zoomers, came of age during an uptick in school shootings, the police killing of George Floyd, the Me Too movement, Donald Trump's 2016 election, and the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision, of course. Maybe as 1 in 10 voters this year are Gen Zers. About 25% of Gen Zers, according to a Pew report from several years ago, about 25% of Gen Zers are self-identify as Latino, Latinx, or Hispanic, and about 14% self-identify as Black, which makes them among the most, if not the most, racially and ethnically diverse of all the generations. About 28% of Gen Zers self-identify as LGBTQ. Gen Zers are more likely to be enrolled in college and to have a college-educated parents as compared to millennials. They want an activist government, according to surveys. They lean a little more toward the Democratic Party than do other generations, but we'll see how that's changed relative to 2020. In 2020, about half of Gen Zers turned out to vote, which was an 11-point increase from 2016. So now we'll have a conversation with a few members of the Gen Z generation for them to tell us what they think. But now let me hand the floor over to my co-moderator, Dr. Tracy Weldon, and she will take it from there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shaw, and good evening, everyone. My name is Tracy Weldon. I am, like my colleague Todd Shaw, a college professor. I specialize in English and linguistics. I am also a mother of 2 Gen Z children and auntie to 3 additional ones. And so I am a concerned citizen, very much anxious to see what the turnout and, of course, the results of this election will be, but also very much interested in what's on the hearts and minds of Gen Z voters, because you are, of course, our future. So I'm looking forward to the conversation this evening, and I will have the pleasure of introducing you or giving them the floor to introduce themselves in just a moment. But I will first allow our colleague, Dr. Kim Simmons, to introduce herself.
Thank you, Dr. Weldon. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kimberly Simmons. I am also a college professor in the area of anthropology and African American studies. It's great to see everyone here tonight. I'm also the mother of 3, and I'm very concerned about the state of things right now in our society. I look forward to the conversation that we have here tonight. Thank you so much. Dr. Shaw?
All right, thank you. So actually, we'll hand it back to Dr. Weldon.
Okay, Jasmine, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine. I'm a recent college graduate. I just graduated in May of my degree in poli-sci, and right now I work in the higher ed world.
Thank you, Jasmine. Aiden.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aiden, and I'm a junior in college majoring in history.
Oops, Jassy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jossie. I'm a college sophomore majoring in biochemistry.
Excellent. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Todd. I think we're going to start with a poll. just to kind of check the temperature of those who've joined us this evening. And then we'll get started.
So I've launched that poll now. If folk would like to register their opinions. And the poll reads, how are you feeling about the upcoming election? Hopeful, anxious, nervous, indifferent, or pessimistic? Just a moment ago, we were going through a thesaurus of emotions. So how are you feeling? Hopeful, anxious, nervous, indifferent, or pessimistic? Give everyone maybe a moment more if you want to respond. All right. Well, thus far I'll report, and we'll keep the poll up. But thus far I'll report that of the respondents, about 14% of you feel hopeful. 86% of you feel anxious and nervous. So let's deal with our own anxiety by having a good conversation and see where we are. Okay. All right.
And
Okay.
Todd, I was going to point out that there's at least one person in the chat who didn't get to submit their response, but they are also feeling nervous. So.
Oh, they're also feeling nervous. Okay. All right. Yes, and you can post in the chat if you didn't get a opportunity to post by way of the poll.
So why don't we turn that question then to our panel? Jassy, would you like to get us started? How are you feeling about this election?
I voted that I was feeling hopeful for this election, just because everyone that I've spoken about it with, I feel like has been doing a good job of keeping up with what issues are on the ballot, and are staying well informed about how they can vote, especially because it's a lot of my friends myself included, a lot of my friends first time voting. So everyone that I've spoken to has been doing a good job of staying up to date on what their options are for voting, whether they're in state or out of state.
Excellent. Thank you, Jassy. Aiden, how are you feeling?
Yeah, personally, I voted. I was feeling anxious. I feel like there's a lot at stake with this election, and both parties are making that point of this is if you want to save democracy, if you want to save the country, then vote for us. And so I'm feeling anxious as to what the future of the country will look like when it's all said and done. But also on to Jossy's point, I was at this comedy show that was put on by my university, and the comedian asked the audience there if we were voting, and the majority of people kind of cheered and were like, and they said yes. And so I think, to his point, I think the majority of my peers are actually really energized and excited and hopeful to be able to, because for a lot of us it is our first presidential election. So I think the majority of us are very excited and energized for this election.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Aiden. Jasmine, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling like the others, kind of like anxious and nervous about this election. This is the second presidential election I ever voted in. So it's kind of like scary how each election I voted in so far has been like, this is it, like democracy is on the line, like your vote really matters. It's kind of scary because I remember being in high school in 2016 and being hopeful that we're going to have a first woman president. And then that never happened. And then here we are in 2024, and we're having the same discussion. Are we going to have a first woman president? And it kind of makes me anxious because I remember being so hopeful of Hillary, and it just didn't happen. And then I was really happy when Biden won in 2020, but like seeing like everything that happened on January 6th, like it kind of makes me anxious about this upcoming election. If it did go to Kamala Harris, that there's going to be a lot of lawsuits or a bunch of pushback from others from the opposite political party. And that's what makes me really anxious, because I don't want to see anyone like I know whatsoever get hurt based off of that. It's something scary. I don't like how this is my second presidential and it's like life or death essentially with my vote.
The stakes are certainly high, and Todd, with your expertise in political science, I'm sure you can tell us just how unusual this particular election is. But I'll turn it to you to ask the panel our next question, and I'd just like to let everyone who's watching know that there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions as well. We're a small enough group that I think when that time comes, you can certainly unmute and ask your questions, but also feel free to use the chat function for that purpose. Todd? You're muted, Todd.
Sorry, you're a talented group, but you may not be able to read lips. Sorry. All right. How are you, with regards to the top issues? What are the top issues that would motivate you and others, or are motivating you and your generation to vote? Or do you think the top issues are being addressed that would motivate you and your generation to vote?
Who would you like to start, Todd?
Let's see. Well, we'll start with Jocelyn.
From my personal experience, the biggest issue that's driving me to vote, I would say, are issues concerning the LGBTQ community. Just because I feel like recently, the past few years, there's been a lot of harmful rhetoric from conservatives about the role that subjects regarding LGBTQ people in their role regard those topics in schools, as well as other topics that they label as DEI or anything like that. I feel like there's a lot of harmful rhetoric surrounding that, when that's really not the reality of the situation. So I don't appreciate the way that it's being portrayed by this demographic, and I feel like there's it's spoken about more responsibly by the Democratic Party.
And let me follow up, Jossie. Did you hear about, when you were in high school, sort of the discussion around sort of the issue of transgender students and sports, or transgender students with regards to the provisions of bathroom facilities that would make them comfortable? Did any of that come across your radar when you were a student, or are you hearing more about these issues now in college?
I had started hearing about them when I was a sophomore in high school. When I think it was around my sophomore year, when our school added gender neutral bathrooms, and there was a lot of backlash from people about it, when it was really not a very big deal at all. And then regarding trans people, specifically trans women competing in sports, it's around the same time that I had started hearing a lot of discussion about that. But again, I feel like it's being over portrayed as this huge epidemic, when the reality of the situation is, while there are instances of trans women beating cis women in competition, it's not at the scale that it's being portrayed at. And if you think about it for more than a second, there's also a lot of instances where people who speak out against being beaten by a trans woman are also being beaten by cis women. So it's not like you can blame it 100% on, oh, it's because I was competing against a trans woman.
Okay, thank you. We very much appreciate you sharing that. Okay, Jasmine, what are your thoughts?
I would say the top issues when it comes to voting, for me at least, and for other of my female friends, it will be reproductive health. That's been like the major issue for a lot of us, because I had a lot of friends that are moderate or lean more Republican, and I also have friends that are Democrats, are very, very, very leftist. But I think what's been helping most of this election has been reproductive health, and how the Democrats have really took it in about protecting women's health. Because I'm recently married, been with the same partner for 4 years, who's been my only boyfriend. We had discussions before, like, yeah, we want to start a family, but I have such bad reproductive health and I can't do that here in the state of South Carolina. So why should I be punished that I can't start a family? Because I'm scared that if something goes wrong, that the state of South Carolina will rather let me die than do anything to save my life. So it's really important issues like that. And I was also having access to birth control, especially because I'm like, a lot of people think like, oh yeah, you're young, Jesse is young, but like you gotta think I've known people, and it's kind of common within my age, at least for being in the South, a lot of these girls I know are married or on their third kid or on their second kid. So something like reproductive health is very important. And another big issue, of course, is the LGBTQ rights, especially like Jossie said, like I think that's a really important factor into why people are voting. There's such hateful rhetoric from the conservative people about how they perceive LGBTQ issues, and especially you see it more often in K through 12 schools, which I think is kind of ridiculous. Why, like I'm seeing signs like all over like Columbia about this certain politician is doing same-sex child changes and like sex changes in school, and I'm like, that's so wild to see all that hateful, harmful rhetoric, and then seeing people I know getting hatred spewed towards them just because they identify as gay. So I think those are the two major issues, at least for me and the people I'm surrounded with when it comes to this election.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Aiden, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are definitely LGBTQ plus rights, and as well as reproductive rights, and also the environment as well, and climate. I see one side as being, environmentally conscious, and prioritizes, the environment, and also and that relates to reproductive rights too, for women, and yeah. Yeah, that's kind of where I stand.
Okay, thank you. I'll hand it back over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Todd. So Aiden, while you have the mic, I believe that this is your first time voting in a presidential election.
Mhm.
So I'm just wondering, as a new voter, especially, how have you found the process? Do you feel like you understood what you needed to do, where you needed to go? Did you have the information that you needed? Did you experience any barriers, or do you know of any of your peers who had any difficulty in voting?
Mm. Not that I know of. No, none of my peers have expressed to me a difficulty with that. And honestly, in regards to any barriers that I've faced, no, I haven't. No, personally, I didn't face any. And my mom here, she was with me when I voted, so I kind of had her as a guide and a resource. So she kind of helped me out, and also the poll workers were really helpful as well. They were very helpful, and so they made it perfectly clear to me as to what I needed to do, how I needed to fill it out, and so the whole process was made very clear to me.
Excellent. Did you find it useful to have the early voting option?
I did, yeah, because we went at a time when it wasn't too busy, and so it was easy just to get in there and get out. Um,
Right.
yeah,
And also, yay, mom.
yeah, mom, yeah.
Jasmine, how about you?
So funny enough, I know people that had issues with when came to voting. It was my husband, because I recently graduated and then we got married and then we moved to our new house. But he lost his driver's license. So through the DMV, you're only allowed once online to get a brand new driver's license, but it had his old address on it. And since we moved, his voter registration, he updated it, it showed it was the new address. And it was and since I got married to him, I didn't switch my last name to his name because I just didn't want to deal with the paperwork. So that causes some barriers because I tried to do the absentee ballot for him since I was his wife. Like you're able to if it's an immediate family member. So funny enough, I submitted it in, and I remember trying to call Richland County's like absentee ballot phone number, millions of times. They don't take voicemail. There was no person on the line. It was terrible. So I went ahead and submitted everything. And it was like back and forth to prove that I was married, because I was, but they didn't have it in the records. I was like, I just got married in July. So it was a back and forth until I finally got it. And then when I got it, it was already past the deadline for him to sign off and submit. So that, and my husband works from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. So he can't go to the DMV. So it's such a hassle for him to find time to go out of his way to go to DMV to switch his driver's license. And then we were able to do it. It was just frustrating, all of that, because he already had the voter registration, but since it doesn't have a photo ID on it, that he wasn't able to vote. So it was the constant back and forth. And we just fixed it recently. So he early voted yesterday, which I'm grateful for. But it was such a big headache of just trying to do it back and forth, back and forth. And I also recently found out that Richland County's DMV is getting sued by the ACLU, because for the past 20 years, they messed up voter registrations for recent 17, 18-year-olds in the state of South Carolina. So I was kind of like, this is not right. So like I had issues with it because of my husband. And I also know others that had issues with it because they're still in college. So they had to go back home, but home's like 4 hours away. And it's always the absentee ballots always coming in super late. So those are kind of the barriers I saw firsthand when it came to voting, but we solved it.
Wow, I'm so sorry to hear about those difficulties, but I'm happy that story had a good ending. I was nervous.
Yeah, no, he was able to vote, so it was fine.
Yeah.
We both really voted because I know he works on election day, so he wasn't able to go vote on election day. And I voted early because the early voting was super close to where I work, so my supervisor just let me go vote. So we're all voted. It was just kind of a headache trying to deal with that. And we're fortunate enough position that we're able to fix it, but it makes me think of others that are going to face those barriers, especially on election day and without knowing of oh my gosh, my driver's license is not updated by my voter registration. So
Well, I'm happy to hear that you stuck with it and that you were successful. Jossie, any issues with voting? I think this might be your first time voting in a presidential election as well. Any issues for you or any of your peers?
For me, it was a smooth experience. I voted by mail because I'm from New York, so it wasn't an option for me to go home for election day. But the biggest issue that I ran into that turned out to not even really be an issue was I just didn't get that many. When I registered for a mail-in ballot in July, I had it sent to my school address, but I just didn't get any update along the way about where it was in the postal system. So I went from July to I think the end of September, just not knowing not knowing when I would get it in the mail. But then I just got the email from the package center that it had arrived. And then I filled it out, sent it in with no problems. And then similar experiences for my friends. Some of them voted by mail. Others, they voted early when they went home for fall break. And I would say I was in a bit of a unique position for this election because I'm an RA at my school. So I tried to help my residents with, because it was a lot of their first time voting as well. So I made a presentation and learned a lot about the in-state voting process, out-of-state voting process, early voting and registration and stuff, and shared it all with them to try and remove some of those barriers for them as well.
That's excellent, Jossie. Good for you. And congratulations in voting in your first presidential election.
Thank you.
Todd, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. I don't want to get too far out of order of the questions that we prepped, but I did notice among our panelists that the issues that you mentioned are none of them were the big, well, no, I shouldn't say big issues. None of them were the issues that we hear so frequently in these election polls: immigration and the economy. So I don't know if you, as Gen Zers, because we asked you about the top issues. I don't know if you say, well, those issues are important, but here's what's most important to me, because to me that's really interesting, at least in our small focus group here, that those issues are not the top of mind issues for you when the candidates and various other folk are making these the top issues. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. Although again, it's a question that just sort of popped in my head a bit. I don't know, Jasmine, what do you think, if you don't mind me calling on you about that?
Yeah, no, of course. Like I was gonna ask if I could go first, but I definitely do think that the economy and also immigration is also equally a very important issue. As a daughter of immigrants, I always firsthand, always in the political world ever since I was tiny. And I remember my parents sending me down about John McCain, about his views on immigration, and every single time, like having those tough discussions about immigration, because it's generally really scary. And immigrants are the backbone of our society. They're the reason why we have our food on our table and they keep everything going around here in the United States. So I think immigration is a very important topic, and I think that one side should stop demonizing them and dehumanizing them, because they're very equally important here in the United States. And also, the economy is also very important. I think the number one issue that a lot of people are going to bring up is the cost of living, because it is very expensive. It's very, very expensive to live by yourself. And I work in higher ed. I do a bunch of career readiness. So I had to do a workshop with a bunch of seniors that are about to graduate, talking about the cost of living and on top of their student loans and taxes and everything, and just seeing them firsthand of being like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I'm gonna live. It's very an important topic to bring up, because I'm like, it's just one of those things that everyone's going to bring up regardless if they're educated or not. So a lot of people are leaning more towards one side, thinking it's going to fix everything, but reality is going to make it the opposite. So cost of living is definitely going to be up there. And I'm going to stop rambling because I can go on.
No, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I appreciate it. Aiden, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I saw a study recently. Well, it wasn't recent, but it was an article, and it referenced a study, and I was curious as to, yeah, like kind of what the top issues amongst Gen Z voters were, and there were, the economy was in there, and also healthcare, amongst of the other issues that we mentioned. But I think the economy is especially prescient, just because I think, especially with upperclassmen in college, when you start to move off campus, then you do have to start thinking about costs like food, transportation, stuff like that. And I mean, that's why we're in school. That's why we're dealing with classes and all that. But then for when we actually graduate and now we're in the real world, okay, now all of a sudden now, there's all these extra costs on top of what we're having to focus on. And so I think the economy is especially prescient, because I think Gen Z we're thinking about that next step for us post school, and once we graduate, we're trying to find our footing, kind of. And I feel like, yeah, cost of living is a very, very important issue for Gen Z, because it's something that we're facing now, a lot of us already, in like little kind of sprinkles, but it'll only increase as we move further along.
Okay, thank you. Zasi, what's your thoughts on that question?
I would say, not to say that the economy is not an important issue, but I would say that among my peers, it's just not, it just so happens that it's not as high in the priority rankings, just because a lot of people that I know are a little bit further from being as financially independent as some people on the older end of the spectrum of Gen Z. Like I still live on campus and paying for, or I'm still on a meal plan by my university, so it's not, cost of living isn't as big of a concern, I would say. Not that it's not important, obviously, it's just that it's something that I don't deal with as much as others. And then I'm forgetting what the other, immigration, right?
Yes, immigration is the other issue.
Yeah. I agree with what Jasmine had mentioned about that, just about how in recently just immigrants have been demonized in this very harmful way. Which is another issue that motivates me to vote the way I did, just because the way that I see immigrants being presented in the media is just, I think it's a little bit, I think it's unethical.
Okay, all right, thanks. Okay, now, so, sorry, the question I was supposed to be asking was just to expound a little bit more on your sense about your fellow Gen Zers in general. Are they engaged, and do you think they're planning to vote? Or have you run across any fellow Gen Zers who say, I'm not voting, or I don't like the choices and I'm really undecided? Aiden, what do you think? Or what have you experienced?
Yeah, I think the majority of my immediate circle aren't as interested in voting, at least as I am. I think they are kind of dispassionate. They don't feel that any candidate is representative of them and their kind of values. But I think also it's like, I don't think that they have a lot of hope in really either party. I don't think they see either party as being the solution long term. And so yeah, that was an interesting kind of topic for, especially with this with this election now, and it was something that I would talk to them throughout just this past year about, and yeah, majority just didn't quite feel as passionate or energized as me.
We'll be nonpartisan, but do you think the changing candidates mattered?
Oh, definitely, yeah, for sure. Mhm.
Well, I'll be nonpartisan. I don't ask you to be.
Yeah.
All right. Jasmine, what do you think in terms of excitement or non-excitement among your peers?
I think with my immediate circle of friends, the people I was surrounded with, when it was still Joe Biden and Trump on the original ballot, that not a lot of people were excited to vote. It was just one of those things like, I don't want either one of them. But the moment he dropped out and it was Kamala Harris on the ticket, that's when I saw a sudden tick of the within my immediate friend groups, like, okay, I think I can actually vote in this election. So I know at least with my immediate circle that they're really engaged and like actually early voted this time around and not waiting till election day. So I know at least with my immediate circle, they've been really engaged to vote. But I do have family friends, they're not the same political party as me. So it's kind of interesting seeing how they feel about voting, because a lot of them are like, I don't want to vote for Trump, but I'm a Republican. So I don't know what I want to do. So it's very interesting seeing the way they come across voting, because they're very on the fence of like, if I vote Harris, I go against my party, but at the same time, I don't agree with Trump and I don't like the third party candidate. So it's very interesting seeing how it's all going to play out in this term, this election. So I'm excited to see the election numbers and seeing how people actually voted. But at least I know within my immediate circle that once those Harris on the ballot, we're like, okay, let's go ahead and just do this early vote. So all of us early voted within my circle.
Okay, cool. Jazzy, what about yourself? What have you observed?
Among my friends, I would say that everyone was very proactive about making sure that they voted. I think just about everyone I know has voted early. And I think a big contributor to that is what Jasmine and Aiden were saying in the beginning about how for a lot of Gen Z voters, this is their first time voting and it's such a high stakes election. But I think that and that's part of the reason why I said I was hopeful for this election, just because from what I've seen, everyone does have that same attitude about this is high stakes. So let's make sure that we're getting this done and being proactive about it.
Okay. All right, thank you. Tracy, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so in a few minutes, we will open the floor for any questions from those who've joined us this evening, but I have one last question. I think it's a nice follow-up from the question about engagement. There's been some talk about there being a gender divide in this particular election. Jasmine mentioned that there is a chance that we will be electing our first woman as president. Is it your sense, particularly among Gen Z voters, that there is such a divide? Do you see it? Do you hear it among your peers, or is this all sort of our imagination? Does anybody want to jump in and talk about that?
I can jump in. Okay. I definitely do think that there is a gender divide from what I see firsthand. It might be different with a gender divide based on race to preference, but there's since being Gen Z, a lot of the older generations don't realize the outreach that there's a bunch of influence on Gen Z through social media. There's these thing called Twitch streamers and also YouTubers and podcasters. So these YouTubers, Twitch streamers, podcasters, they all aim their content towards young adolescents. So a bunch of these young adolescents grow up with them, and based off their political views, go exactly what there are. Like you have, for example, Logan Paul, Jake Paul, Andrew Tate, a bunch of, and like Aiden Ross. Like you have a bunch of these streamers that have a couple of hundreds and thousands, predominantly male viewers, especially young, watching them and honestly telling them you need to vote for Trump. If you vote Harris, it's not cool. And like saying that you have to vote for Trump, you have to vote for Trump, and spreading like very much of right-wing rhetoric on top of their impressionable audience. So you definitely see that a lot because put someone under the bus I know closely, I won't name them, but like talking with them and like they're very impressionable, essentially. Like freshly, like this person, freshly 18-year-old was, you look at his YouTube history, it's a bunch of these videos from like Aiden Ross, Logan Paul about being like, why leftists suck, why you need to vote Trump. So I definitely do think there's a huge gender divide, and granted it's based differently on race. And so I think it's kind of hard that you have all these social media streamers have such a big platform and they're using it to tell their very young audience of if you vote Harris, you're in the wrong.
Thank you, Jasmine. And I do think it's an important point to note the intersections with race and gender and with this particular issue. Jossie or Aiden, any thoughts to share?
I would say that from what I've seen in person, I haven't seen a gender divide, not to say that there isn't one at all. But I definitely agree with what Jasmine was saying about the gender divide being apparent online, because a big thing for the influencers, all that she mentioned is this toxic idea of masculinity, and I feel like they have this easy avenue with a female candidate for saying that, and a very susceptible audience to the idea that masculinity is at stake, because there's all this rhetoric about the fall of Western civilization is on the line for this election, which is like advertising that to a bunch of young people. A lot of them are going to believe that, and I think it's whether or not it sounds like you're overplaying the issue. There's a large amount of people that are going to believe that and vote accordingly.
Thank you, Jossie.
So that's how I see the gender divide manifesting.
Absolutely. Did you want to add anything, Aiden?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think amongst my immediate circle, I think there is a gender divide where the majority of my male friends do tend to lean more conservative, and whereas my female friends tend to lean more liberal and democratic. And I agree as well with just how online personalities there does seem to be this appeal to conservatism and with Trump now, with Trumpism. And that seems to be especially convincing to young adolescent males. And so I think online, yeah, there is with young adolescent males, I think they tend to really soak up that conservatism talk and yeah, and Trumpism.
Thank you. So I'm going to open the floor for any questions from those who've joined us this evening. Again, I think we're a small enough group that if you're comfortable just unmuting, maybe use the hand raise function and let us know what's on your mind. The chat is also open if you'd like to put your question in the chat, and Kim is keeping her eye on that as well. Any questions for our panel? While they're thinking about their questions, Todd, if I could come back to the question of how unusual this particular election is. Is it our imagination that the stakes are so high, or is this really a special election in recent history or in the history of this country? Where are we in terms of the significance of this particular election?
Tracy, the word unprecedented has been overused in this election, but it is true. We have never really seen a election where the country is so starkly divided, not probably since the Civil War. Did you have the divides quite as stark as they are now, with the level of polarization and what we as political scientists call affective polarization, meaning that not only do strong partisans from the political parties simply disagree ideologically, but they have a emotional reaction and an emotional and visceral level of disagreement among them. And in the sense that, you've heard like these instances or polls where individuals say, well, I wouldn't want my son or daughter to date a Republican or to date a Democrat, right? And there are even ways in which people are sorting themselves and their affiliations with their neighbors based upon partisanship. So that added to the fact that the language, the xenophobia, the racism, the misogyny that is too frequently being voiced, and it has been a part of American political history, but you'd have to go back about a century to find language quite as xenophobic, quite frankly racist, and misogynist as we've heard in this most recent election, even though, our last several decades have been pretty stark. So yeah, this election, also that it will be the level of turnout, we'll see. In 2020, we had the largest number of Americans vote in a presidential election, the largest number of any election in American history, with roughly 160 or 170,000, 160 or 170 million voters. We'll see if that level of turnout also occurs. But it's quite stark in terms of what's going on with this election.
Thank you, Todd. And I saw two hands, and then we have a question in the chat. Kim, let's go to you first.
Okay, thanks. Just want to thank our panelists. This is a wonderful conversation, and I just, as you were talking, and I was taking notes and just thinking about things. We have a call right now with different generations, right here on the call, and I'm thinking, for the three of you, if you can just think about this in the area of civil rights, human rights and reproductive rights. 20 years ago, I felt differently, than I do now. I mean, 20 years ago, I would say, hey, we're on the right path. We have this momentum. We've made this change. We protested, we're on this path and we've made these gains. And so I think for a lot of us, kind of in my generation, now we're feeling like, okay, what is happening? We're turning this curve, we're going back. And I think we really feel that. And I think for the generation before us, I mean, they're seeing that too. And have y'all picked up on that? The three of you, Gen Zers, have you picked, I mean, are you kind of sensing that, wow, my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, we were moving. What are y'all feeling right now in terms of this generational, if I can say it's a generational kind of impact or shift? What are y'all feeling right now, this moment?
Who wants to take that?
Can I ask you to repeat the question one more time?
I'm sorry, that was a lot in there that I just said. No, I was just thinking, maybe as you've listened to, your parents or grandparents, do you kind of feel like some of the things that we're wanting to, I guess, a sense of urgency that we feel right now, that we have been on a different path. We had certain gains, and we had, we fought for certain rights. And so some of the things that are at the top of our list now are some of the things that we actually had gained. And so now we find ourselves going back. So do you feel that your generation right now, do you feel like, wow, not the weight of things, but do you kind of feel like we have to take this on and just kind of feel this even more present in this moment because it's something that we actually had gained? We had moved through these areas, that were important to us, and we're finding ourselves going back,
One of the candidates has that tagline, "We're not going back, we're not
Right.
going back." Does that
Right.
resonate with your generation? This sense
Thank you.
that, depending on how this turns out, this could be turning back the clock.
I think that is a very big concern around Gen Z voters. Just because I feel like in recent years, people have learned not so much to take for granted the rights that people have fought for in the past that we can now exercise today. And I think that some people have made very clear that they don't see it as they don't see there's a little bit of a divide between what people see as rights and what is not, like marriage equality, reproductive rights, and things like that. And I think that that's something that Gen Z voters are aware of, because this isn't the only issue where it's framed like that, where it's okay, it's Gen Z inheriting the future, so now is the time to take action. I think that that's the way that the issues of climate change are presented to us very, very frequently. And I think that it's an attitude that Gen Z has adopted for all the issues being up for all the issues that are at stake for this election.
Aiden, I saw your head nodding. Did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking when you mentioned the campaign slogans and how one is, let's not go back or something to that effect. It made me think of Trump's, make America great again. And of course that implies that America was once great. And it's like, wait, when were we great? Like what time, what moment in history is he pointing, is he alluding to? And what time is he trying to revert back to when he thought America was great again? So I think that it's evident in and just the slogans of the parties of the two campaigns. And it's I mean that's the difficulty is, everyone has their own opinions about, what this country, I mean how like what well everyone has a different vision of what, this country, of what great in this country means. And so I think but for it, it's just a matter of finding out what that means to you and taking that initiative yourself. Taking it upon yourself to find that and to find your moral stance and your value point, and actively participate in, in the in the political process based off of that, and to put that to put that first. Don't put party first, but put your values, put what you believe first, and that can kind of help to, I think, guide you towards the future that you want for this country, is to first be able to know that for yourself. Yeah.
Thank you, Aiden. David, I know you had your hand up. Do you have a question?
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm down here corralling grandchildren, but hopefully you won't hear one in the background, which is why I don't have my camera on right now. But so I guess there's a sense among most folks that, you know, both candidates are obviously are not perfect candidates. They have their flaws. And some people have said, for example, that, and this is a narrative that allegedly has come from Black men, that they're not going to support Kamala Harris because of her prosecution record of Black men in California. And so I'm wondering if you all feel like your vote is a vote for the lesser evil, one, and two, what does an ideal candidate look like to you all?
Jasmine?
Yeah, I could take that question. So definitely for me, I'm gonna have a radical point of view with this, but it definitely was a lesser of two evils. Personally, like each candidate has granted, the Kamala Harris has its pros and its cons, but I'm not the biggest fan of Kamala Harris. I still vote for her because it was lesser two evils, and I felt the same way with the whole entire 2020 election. Personally, for me, I think if you're running for president, no matter who you are, every single president is like a war criminal. I know that's a hot take, but they always end up doing something that gets a lot of people hurt or ends up in a conflict. So for me, like it's really hard having a perfect politician because a perfect politician doesn't exist. So like, yeah, I really liked Obama, but he was the US president that deported the most undocumented immigrants in United States history. So it's like one of those things of they can do really great stuff, but also in the back end, they do really terrible stuff. So for me, there's really no ideal politician. I just wish they just did not commit war crimes.
Aiden or Jossie, anything to add? There's a
I think it's, oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, Aiden, please.
No, yeah, I think what Jasmine said is true. We do have to take our politicians with a grain of salt. And to expect them to represent us fully, I think is problematic, is a mistake. And so yeah, with every politician, with every candidate, you know, presidential or if it's a local election, I think the voter has to do their due diligence and educate themselves on every politician on the platform being presented. And yeah, because just to be the blind voter, I mean that's just as bad as I think it's like not voting, because you know, so you have to educate yourself and really just and understand that yeah, you know, like Jasmine said, there is no perfect politician. No.
Thank you. I wanted to turn your attention also to the chat. The question from Millicent: with so much fake news and election tampering, where do you go for news you trust about the candidates? I love that question. Where do Gen Zers go for their news? Who do you trust?
I guess I'll go. Definitely NPR, CNN. Sometimes I check out the Washington Post, but even then, sometimes like I'm lazy and I don't read the news fully. But funny enough, a lot of Gen Z gets their local news through social media. So there's Instagram accounts like NPR, also Washington Post, and also Instagram accounts like Impact. There's also one called Climate. There's also one called St. Hoax. And then they do a really good job like giving you like accurate data and also backing up their sources about the information they spread about the upcoming election. So that's how I get a chunk of my news, which I know is bad, but I do read the articles that come along with it when I do have time. So that's how I do it. It might be different for others.
Thank you, Jasmine. Jossie or Aiden?
I agree with Jasmine that social media is a big source of news among my demographic, undergraduates. And I don't know, I feel like the way that it manifests is that the same issues will be appearing on people's feeds, and just between whatever sources, and it's the same sources that Jasmine mentioned that people that I know personally follow, kind of just comparing what those sources are saying, just corroborating what is and isn't the same between them is how at least in my circle, like discussions around politics go.
Aiden, anything to add?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for me, I agree with both. I think social media, just because it is really convenient. And of course you do have to be careful, and I have to be careful too. But yeah, it's super convenient. I also like NPR, Associated Press. Sometimes I'll look at. I try to find more kind of center of the spectrum. Try to look for that news sources, but yeah, I mean, sometimes I don't always follow that. Yeah, I mean, I'll look at CNN. Even, I mean, sometimes I'll check out conservative sources as well, just to see what they're saying about things as well. So sometimes that's what I'll do. I'll kind of flip-flop between kind of opposite ends of the spectrum, just to see how both might be covering the same or similar stories.
All right, thank you. So I know we're coming up on an hour. Are there any other questions from the audience before I turn it back to Todd to close us out? Okay, Todd, the floor is yours.
All right, well, thank you, Tracy. And I would just sort of say, in response to Jasmine, I know that one of the issues that's been on the minds of Gen Z and a lot of folk is, of course, the humanitarian fundamental crisis in Gaza, given the Israeli-Hamas Hezbollah war. And although I know there's been, there were many campus protests that happened in the spring, not so much in the fall, but I know that issue has not gone away for many Gen Zers and others, myself included, others. And so there are still those issues that whatever candidate, wins this election, or candidates that win this election, the hard work needs to occur in order for democracy to be observed here, and human rights and fundamental sovereignty and human rights to be observed across the seas. So thank you very much to our Gen Z audience. It's hard to kind of clap on Zoom, but you can certainly give a finger clap or a silent clap. So thank you so very much, great folks. This was really kind of quite illuminating for us folk who are the Facebook generation at best, because I've already heard from folk to say, Creed, maybe you ought to do a platform other than Facebook. And I said, well, as soon as I learn one other than Facebook, we will. But I want to just remind our audience who are reviewing this by way of broadcast that we are going to post it to our Creed page. So if you are seeing this elsewhere, because we'll post it also to Creed and to YouTube. And so if you're seeing this by way of YouTube or some other site, we invite you to join Creed. Creed is a nonpartisan group of citizen activists who connect ourselves to the larger pro-democracy movement in America. We care about democracy, but we also care about restoring ethics and equity in the United States. Diversity, equity, inclusion are key principles that we feel are fundamental in American life and in American justice and fairness, along with electing individuals who are ethical to office. Let me also just give a couple of shout outs to resources. One of which is an excellent resource is vote.org. That will, if you're interested to know of your polling place, if you're interested to know about things related to election protection, we have some of these resources on the Creed page as well. If you're in South Carolina, where a couple of us are based, sevotes.gov or .org is key to look up those resources. And of course, being able to vote at your polling place, and most of the states, it's from roughly 7 a.m. in the morning to 7 p.m. in the evening. If at any point you have difficulty in voting, or if you are not listed as a voter at a particular polling place, ask the individuals there for a provisional ballot, no matter what state you're in. Provisional ballots are, the state county boards do have some level of discretion as how they treat those ballots, but if for any reason you're having difficulty and you are being denied on some level, then asking for that provisional ballot is key, and to be insistent about asking for a provisional ballot. But you can also Google election protection, and there are various organizations such as the ACLU, the NAACP, if for any reason you or other voters encounter difficulty and or harassment as a voter. So we want to make you aware and Creed of all of these resources, because we know that this is a high stakes election. It's also a election where folk are feeling quite tense and anxious. In fact, so our ending poll, just sort of sharing the results here of our ending poll, that we had 20% of our audience felt hopeful and 80% feel anxious or nervous. Although it's not scientific, we suspect it does reflect what's true for a lot of Americans. So, in order to deal with some of that anxiety, we encourage you to think about these resources and do connect to them. I want to thank my co-moderator. She's always an outstanding person with regards to facilitating these conversations. And again, thank you to Aiden, to Jasmine, to Jassy for participating and giving us some genuine insights. Also, a shout out to Kim Simmons, behind the scenes, but always connected, and to David Simmons. Between myself and Tracy, we are among the convening members, along with Rita Walker and David Crockett, the convening committee. But again, connect with Creed and plant a seed for the future. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and happy democracy. Happy Democracy Day, because the point is to fight for and to preserve American democracy and improve American democracy. So thanks again, and do take care.
And don't forget to vote.
And don't forget to vote. Absolutely. All right. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, everyone.
Bye-bye.